Our journey on the Mukuba Express takes us across one of the most beautiful natural landscapes in Tanzania. Abandoned by the Germans, an old steam train at the entrance of the Celos Game Reserve is a reminder of East Africa's colonial days. Small aircraft are the most practical mode of transport in this legendary but remote game reserve. After a short stop, the plane returns in order to bring more visitors to the Celos Game Reserve. The Rufiji River not only influences the landscape of Celos, but it's also the main lifeline of this unique and natural environment. Celos is Africa's oldest and also its largest game reserve. It's the habitat of many rare animals. More than 400 bird species are to be found here, and it also contains some fascinating flora. Tall borassus palm trees are one of the natural landmarks of the Rufiji River. But this peaceful and idyllic first impression of the river can be deceptive. This baboon appears to be oblivious to the dangers that lurk within the water. The mainly forested regions along the Rufiji also attract a large number of lions. The safari travelers are safe while inside their jeeps, so they're able to approach these majestic predators that are relaxing in the shade. Next, we encounter further striking inhabitants of the Celos Game Reserve. Giraffes and antelopes are perfectly at home here. The vast array of impressions and insights into the natural circle of life here and its remarkable ecology are truly fascinating. And there's an abundance of food that satisfies the requirements of all the creatures that live here. Due to its remote location, the reserve is like a secret paradise. Despite its beautiful landscape, for many years the Celos area was unsuitable for human habitation. The infertile land and scant rainfall meant that agriculture was almost impossible. As with most of the camps in this region, the Impala Camp is located close to the river. A number of trophies mark previous successful hunting safaris. The 6 well-equipped tents of Impala Camp make the stay here a special adventure. The exclusive and partly nostalgic furnishings of the camp are evocative of German colonial times. From the veranda, there's a splendid view of the surroundings, an opportunity to relax. However, we don't have long to relax as the next boat trip on the Rufiji River awaits us at the jetty. The boat provides a good view of the waterfowl, but the river also attracts some of the larger inhabitants of Celos. The African elephant requires huge quantities of water. Its thirst drives the impressive pachyderm to the banks of the Rufiji. An adult elephant requires between 100 and 150 liters of water each day. Particularly during the dry season, the river is extremely important for the survival of many creatures. We reach the next landing stage and continue our safari on land. After a short time, we come across some of the most famous members of Africa's animal kingdom. But not all the sections of the 52,000 square kilometer Celos Game Reserve are open to the public. In addition to the wildlife, the flora here is also something to behold. And this 1,000-year-old baobab tree is an amazing sight. A lion has found some shade beneath a tree and spends some time taking it easy. After this short excursion on land, we continue our journey by boat and pass by a natural dugout that belongs to the local natives. Despite the harsh living conditions here, in recent years a number of families have settled on the banks of the Rufiji. For those who appreciate wildlife, Celos is a veritable paradise, with amazing exotic birds such as the African hornbill. This is the final resting place of the namesake of this game reserve, Frederick Celos, who was a famous and well-liked hunter. Most visitors who leave this vast and beautiful game reserve with its truly staggering variety of plant and wildlife do so with a feeling of regret. Early the next morning, we make for the train station. There's no precise timetable for the train that will arrive here from Zambia. It could arrive at virtually any moment. The train stops here only twice a week. There's plenty of time for passengers to enjoy a good breakfast. More and more people, most of them locals, gather at the station. Even today, the arrival of a train is still a special event. Everything about this small station in the north of the Celos Game Reserve is full of nostalgia. most of the railroad is made up of a single track. Only a few stations have sidings to take the carriages of the Mucuba Express. As the ticket offices gradually open for business, more people arrive. The railway is a vital mode of transport in this region. Although the purchase of a ticket guarantees a place on the train, passengers continue to wait for its uncertain arrival. Here, there's no such thing as time. Then finally, the long wait is over, and the legendary Mucuba Express announces its arrival. With a loud creaking sound, the train comes to a halt. Now the crowds of people that have been waiting patiently begin to move. Numerous tradesmen sell food to the passengers. For the local people, the train is not only an important means of transport. The sale of goods to its passengers is the only source of income for many of them. After a long stop, the train continues towards Dar es Salaam, which will mark the end of this journey on the Mucuba Express. The railway line travels across the most captivating natural landscapes of the Celos Game Reserve. Despite the railroad and its safari travelers, this part of Celos has retained its original and unspoiled splendor right up to the present day. Every now and then we travel past the isolated dwellings of the local line keepers. Otherwise, the landscape has no other signs of human habitation. The journey on the Mucuba Express is one of the most relaxing and impressive ways to observe the landscape. For several hours, we travel through untouched nature. Around a quarter of this huge reserve is covered by savanna. During the dry season, most of the indigenous animals of Celos live close to the Rufiji River. But with or without East Africa's wildlife, the journey on the Central Railway is a very special experience. Small station, the train enters a siding, and a train that is traveling to Zambia passes by. As is common in this remote area, the station is surrounded by a number of huts. They form a kind of small village. After a short break, we continue our journey. This historic railroad is the backbone of central Tanzania. Soon the train of the Central Railway arrives at Mzenga station. It's crowded with tradesmen who are selling all manner of goods. We have only a short time to enjoy the colourful scene. Our train moves on towards Dar es Salaam. Over the years, many of the old train stations have been abandoned. Now they look like sad relics of a bygone age. The historic origins of this extraordinary railroad date back to German colonial times at the beginning of the 20th century. What was once known as the Middle Land Railroad was one of the most technically challenging and expensive projects of East Africa's German colonists. Today, the 1,254-kilometre Middle Land Railroad is an important reminder of those bygone days. In the late afternoon, the train reaches its destination, and this unforgettable train journey comes to an end. The new train station is situated a little beyond Dar es Salaam city centre. Here there's hustle and bustle both day and night. Since the 1970s, the Tazara train station has replaced that of colonial times. Dar es Salaam, Harbour of Peace. The name of this East African metropolis highlights the special significance of the harbour for the city's 3.5 million inhabitants. In 1856, this was just a tiny fishing village, but with the arrival of the German colonists at the end of the 19th century, everything changed. With the decision of the colonial rulers to move their capital from Bagamoyo to Dar es Salaam, the city began to grow at a rapid pace. Several old facades indicate the former splendor of this historic epoch. The impressive Catholic St. Joseph's Cathedral was consecrated in 1905 and now shines out in all its glory. Restoration work has removed the ravages of time from this neo-Gothic building. In the heart of the city, St. Joseph's Cathedral is well worth a visit. Only a few steps from the cathedral is the ferry port. From here, ferries embark for the legendary spice and pirate island of Zanzibar. Dar es Salaam's Lutheran church was built almost at the same time as the nearby cathedral. Its massive, fortress-like architecture is truly striking. The interior of the church is always busy, and the church services are highly atmospheric. After a construction time of only 3 years, the Lutheran church was completed in 1902. Thus, it was completed earlier than St. Joseph's Cathedral. With their lively songs and dances, the church services here are more like a religious festival than a contemplative occasion. Though there are several Christian buildings here, the city is a colorful mosaic of many different religious beliefs. As a center of religion, Dar es Salaam is a cosmopolitan metropolis. The ravages of the First World War also influenced this part of Africa. More than 100,000 African soldiers died in battle. The Askari monument in the center of the city dates back to 1927 and commemorates that tragic time. Along the Kivukoni front are some of the most beautiful architectural examples of Dar es Salaam's early colonial times. The fish market is situated at the end of the bay and is a delight. Fishmongers ply their trade with a good degree of pride. Early in the morning from 6 o'clock, the local fishermen erect their stalls. The fish market is a vibrant place. Although it is mainly fish that is featured here, clothing and various other goods are also on display. It's a colourful sight. For those interested in history, the National Museum can provide a good insight into East Africa's dramatic past. Exhibits that feature the development of mankind, as well as various precious fossils from the Oldupai Canyon, are among the main highlights of the museum. Since its inauguration in 1940, the museum's exhibits have grown and grown. They now provide a remarkable picture of this country's history. In addition to archaeological finds and illustrations of East Africa's various historical epochs, a section of the museum is also dedicated to the history of Dar es Salaam's former city fathers. In the direct vicinity of the museum is the old German hospital, a popular attraction. The fortress-like building has only recently been lovingly restored and leaves a deep impression on all those who see it. It features the architecture of German colonial times. Our marvelous journey on the Mukubwa Express across the unspoiled landscape of Tanzania comes to a wonderful conclusion at the Indian Ocean. The numerous recollections of this unique train journey will remain in the minds of all those who've experienced it forever. Welcome to Florida, the southernmost state of the USA, where for most of the time the sun shines truly bright. A place of excitement and joie de vivre. Life gradually stirs along the endless beaches that are extremely popular with holidaymakers. Miami Beach is a narrow island just off the mainland and Miami City. A leisure world of the young and beautiful, and of the rich and famous. Stars and various other members of the glitterati have rediscovered the island, and now it entertains a whole new generation of visitors. The Art Deco District is southern Florida's colorful shop window. The most popular district in Miami, and unique in the world. Considering the extraordinary splendor, it's difficult to believe that many of these 500 properties were once in a dilapidated state of repair. The colorful facades of the city's hotels shine out in the sunlight. And the popular bars, cafes and restaurants act as a magnet for tourists. At dusk, this district comes alive. It's when the high life of Miami Beach begins, and the Art Deco district becomes a mass of neon light. This is where the city's ultra-trendy bars are located. Each night is a real adventure, and everyone dances until sunrise. In the past century, Miami has been transformed into an exciting metropolis. The striking skyline of downtown originated at the beginning of the 1980s. A landscape of modern skyscrapers, flamboyant luxury and architectural splendor. The Bayside Marketplace is ideal for shopping. It's situated on the route to Key Biscayne, a modern open-air shopping centre that is located at the yacht harbour, close to downtown, and it's well worth a visit. A trip around the harbour is a must. The boat travels past the new harbour districts. The port of Miami is the busiest cruise ship harbour in the world. The finest luxury liners embark from here to the Caribbean. Coral Gables was built in the 1920s in flamboyant Southern European style, as was the Venetian Pool and the Biltmore Hotel, whose tower is a replica of the Giralda in Seville. The Fairchild Tropical Garden is located in Biscayne Bay. It's one of the largest botanical gardens in America and is to be found in Matheson Hammond Park. Strange trees and bushes, exotic flowers, an authentic rainforest, and unusual wildlife and fruit. It covers more than 30 hectares and was originally a swamp. Since the 1950s, Virginia Key has been the home of the Miami Seaquarium, a marvelous world of marine life. The Seaquarium soon became world famous due to the incredible performances of its marine life. It's well worth a visit. With its 70 rooms, Vizcaya Castle was built as an extravagant winter residence according to Italian Renaissance design. It was built in 1916 in Biscayne Bay. A manufacturer of agricultural machinery, James Deering, had this enchanting castle built during the First World War. It's thought to have cost $15 million. A famous magazine wrote about the castle, a triumph of nostalgia that commemorates the golden age of both art and architecture. Almost 4 hectares of gardens of both French and Italian design complete this impressive property. And wealthy Americans just can't resist European architecture. It also contained a small harbour. Its landing stage is reminiscent of a ship made of stone. It's rumoured that Deering hid his alcoholic beverages here during Prohibition. The Florida Keys is a group of 31 coral islands that extend from Miami on the southern point of Florida to the Caribbean. The first and largest is Key Largo, made famous by the Hollywood movie. It starred Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, who survived a hurricane here, a region well known for its savage storms. The Overseas Highway travels across 43 bridges and past numerous turquoise blue bays in a southerly direction. A journey on this highway is quite an experience. Finally, we arrive at the last island and the end of our tour. Key West, a fascinating and inspiring place for creative people and of course for holidaymakers. Tourist trains and buses travel across the 5-kilometre-long island to the southernmost point of the landmass of the United States. Key West has a dramatic history. It was once owned by both the Spanish and the English. A railroad was also built here. This region prospered due to its sponge industry and the manufacture of cigars, as well as the salvage gained from numerous shipwrecks. However, in 1930, Key West suddenly became bankrupt. Its houses and gardens gradually deteriorated until various hippies and artists rediscovered the island, plus a number of philosophers and scholars. The region is a melting pot of immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean. A unique American cocktail of glamour, luxury, and harsh reality. The Everglades, a vast expanse of freshwater swamps that cover southern Florida and are located 50 kilometers from Miami. Throughout the year, the majority of the 6,000 square kilometer national park is covered with the slow-moving waters of the Okeechobee River. Small tree-covered islands known as hardwood hammocks contain a large variety of tropical vegetation. And amid the park is Everglades City. Next, a short excursion into the wilderness, in a vehicle that looks similar to a tall tractor that has been adapted to the difficult terrain, from which a raccoon watches from above. The airboat, A boat with an air screw is the most popular means of transport for excursions in this muddy swamp. The river is relatively calm most of the time. Although it's only 15 centimeters deep, its flooded areas are approximately 80 kilometers wide. The Miccosukee Indians were forced to hide in the almost inaccessible areas of the swampland following the final Seminole War in the middle of the 19th century. Florida's native Indians originated from 300 courageous Seminole Indians who escaped from the US government and fled into the Everglades. General Williams, who served in the Dixieland Army, founded Naples, that eventually developed into the most beautiful town on the West Coast. Long sandy beaches are particularly inviting for the many families who come here. The small island of Belle is located just off the Gulf Coast. The island's special attraction is the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Park, a wonderful birdlife sanctuary. And nature always puts on a first-class display, especially when seen at close quarters on foot or traveling by canoe in the mangrove swamps. The nature reserve was named after Norwood Ding Darling, a cartoonist from New York who was interested in the protection of wildlife. One man transformed the small town of Sarasota into the cultural capital of Florida. The great circus owner, John Ringling, who had his winter home built here and had his residence, Kadzan, constructed within this parkland. The internal rooms of the complex were eventually turned into a museum in which paintings of the various members of the Ringling family are displayed alongside great works of art. Since 1930, the largest private collection of works of the Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens has been on public view here. The property's garages have now been transformed into a circus museum with all kinds of marvelous objects from the circus world. At the tender age of 16, John Ringling and 4 of his brothers travelled the country. They played music and also performed comedy. In 1844, they founded a circus, and later 2 of their other brothers joined them. They soon became extremely successful. Even the wagons that contained the big cats were beautifully decorated, as were the barrel organs whose exciting sound heralded the fact that the circus was in town. The Ringling brothers bought the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and their greatest show on earth was performed around the world. Long before John F. Kennedy visited Tampa Bay, only indigenous natives and pirates lived here. Henry Plant laid the railway line as far as to the Florida coast, and his hotel became a museum. But Tampa Bay's main attraction is the world-famous Busch Gardens that feature an abundance of African fauna, fantastic landscapes in which even the white tigers feel obviously comfortable. A steam locomotive pulls shining green carriages through the huge entertainment park that contains more than 2,800 animals. The park can also be seen from above, from a slow-moving cable car. For the stout-hearted who wish to experience Africa, various safaris are on offer. Our feathered friends always draw a crowd. Whether fast asleep or wide awake, the slender-tailed meerkats spend their lives on sandy ground. All the animals here are well cared for. Even the endangered and sensitive orangutans. Birds that perform tricks can be admired. And also a soaking wet journey in a tree trunk or a wild water canal. Then perhaps a white-knuckle ride on the roller coaster at breakneck speed. The carriages travel overhead and defy the laws of gravity. American Africa, a popular project that has been created by one of the largest brewery companies in the world. Orlando was founded in 1875 as an agricultural distribution center. Today, the biggest entertainment parks in the world are located here and attended by almost 43 million visitors each year. SeaWorld is a world-famous marine park and features amazing shows and incredible animal stunts that are simply breathtaking. And here, as in Busch Gardens, the Anheuser-Busch Brewery has invested a lot of money in the highly profitable entertainment business. Hawaii is also featured here. And threatened by extinction elsewhere, huge manatees live here without a care in the world, well protected and also well fed. Dolphins are to be seen everywhere. They're the omnipresent mascots of the park. These intelligent animals enjoy contact with man, moving through the water with a real smile on their face, and allowing their trainers to ride on their backs while being stroked by admirers. Entertainment provided by motorboat, water ski and scooter stuntmen attracts hordes of spectators several times a day into a large marine theatre. The park's main attraction is to be found in the Shamu Stadium, where orca whales and their offspring splash their fins at the audience and throw their trainers through the air. A demonstration of human and animal relationships second to none. On the east coast of the Florida Peninsula, Cape Canaveral juts out into the Atlantic. As far back as 1949, the Rocket Trial Zone, as it was then known, was built here. And
an area that has been further developed and extended to become the world-famous space station it is today. From here, the first Americans were sent into orbit and landed on the moon. Since it all began with Wernher von Braun's V2 rocket, more than 110 manned space flights have been launched from the Cape. To glimpse into the amazing cockpit and see the astronauts' spacesuits really does evoke a strong sense of science fiction. The Kennedy Space Center is the last stop on Earth before the amazing flight into the cosmos. Now the journey into the history of space travel can begin. Buses transport visitors from all over the world from one attraction to another. A viewing platform has been built on one of the roofs. From here, various launch pads can be seen in the distance. The original layout of the Launch Surveillance Control Room is featured in the Apollo Saturn V Center. An impressive multimedia show, visitors can experience a simulated countdown just like the real thing.
1, 0.
And here it is, a close-up view of that famous rocket. The focal point of this spectacular display is the fully restored Saturn V moon rocket. Next, a quick glimpse into the area in which these rockets, capsules and vehicles have been constructed and assembled by countless specialists. The Kennedy Space Center is America's gateway to the stars, from where rockets, satellites and astronauts are launched into the universe to explore the unknown. More than one small step for mankind. Kennedy is a giant leap into the future. Today, Fort Lauderdale is a popular residential area located on the South Atlantic coast. Its harbour and sandy beaches are situated in front of newly built skyscrapers. A journey on the Jungle Queen that travels along several canals is a must. A real American Venice. The tour travels along canals with houses and gardens situated at the water's edge. It's reminiscent of Venice. Fort Lauderdale was once a heavily fortified camp. A number of its buildings have survived, a small remnant of American history. In 1838, Major William Lauderdale had a fort built here during the Seminole Wars to protect the settlers on the East Coast from Indian attack. The Jungle Queen interrupts her round trip for a short stop in a zoo where children are permitted to feed the animals or must wait patiently for the next show.
Okay, we've been doing this like this since the 1700s. Main reason why.
An alligator trainer explains many interesting facts about the animals. And at the end of the show, a baby alligator appears. Not surprisingly, this area has more motorboats, water taxis and yachts than any other city in Florida. It's a floating holiday resort. A tiny paradise in the south of the Sunshine State. The finger-shaped peninsula extends from the American mainland to the Caribbean. Its southernmost point is located close to Cuba. This is a place of the history of the circus and the exploration of outer space. A place of entertainment parks and unforgettable adventures. Florida is a magical place, with something to offer for one and all.
Patagonia, the southerly region in Argentina, the second largest state of South America, a dream destination of strong winds, endless plains, glacial landscapes, and total isolation at the end of the world. Our journey begins in the deep south in a natural paradise of both sky and earth. Tierra del Fuego, America's wild south, a land of fire at the end of the world. located between Chile and Argentina. We visit the Argentinian section of Fireland and arrive at Ushuaia, the southernmost town in the world and the gateway to Antarctica. It's a small town that's experienced a great boom in recent years. It's become quite industrial, and it's also the center of Fireland's tourism. It's difficult to believe that not long ago, nothing but the wooden huts of Anglican missionaries stood here, those who introduced Christianity to the Fireland Indians in 1869. Both small and more recently large buildings form a kind of patchwork. The town is a combination of mountain village and fjord settlement. The sheltered bay and harbour indicate why the first Europeans dropped anchor here. However, the archipelago was settled far earlier. Around 10,000 years ago, the first humans settled here. Ushuaia surprises at every corner. The small town contains many sights, but it is the unusual variety of things to see that makes it so captivating. A mixture of color and liveliness, but also of bleak decay. The town's most impressive building complex is situated on a slope below snow-covered mountains with a view across the town and harbor. The Museo Presidio and Maritimo. Outside the restored and yellow shining walls is a small locomotive whose history we will soon come to know. The route to the main prison leads through the exhibition rooms of the Maritimo Museum, whose theme is the role of Argentina in Antarctica. Models of old sailing ships, messages in bottles, and old maps are on display. It is a reminder of numerous great explorers. Next, we enter Presidio Prison, a dark chapter of Tierra del Fuego's historic past. The prison was inaugurated in 1902. 360 hardened criminals in yellow-blue striped clothing were forced to build the prison, a monumental chamber of horrors. The prisoners were kept in cruel, tiny cells from which few survived. They worked outside, constructing streets, bridges, and various buildings. So originated the southernmost railway line in the world. The trip to Harborton Farm is a popular excursion from Ushuaia in an easterly direction along the Beagle Canal. The first stop in Terra Valle Mayor features Siberian Huskies. Here, various breeds are reared and everything is done to breed Huskies with the best possible characteristics. Next, we travel in a northeasterly direction. Through swampland and past small lakes. Again and again, the Beagle Canal comes into view. It appears in the distance, and next it's quite close. In a remote bay, people collect seashells. But then we approach our final destination. The primeval landscape gives the impression that the world was created only yesterday. The trees up high are shaken by the wind and look like flags. Flags waiting to wave in the wind. The Beagle Canal accompanies us to the end of the road, Harborton Farm. renowned Anglican, Reverend Thomas Bridges, once stood up for the region's primeval inhabitants and founded the Esperanza Harborton, in which he lived with them. Far away from Ushuaia, he attempted to prepare a group of Yamana to gradually adapt to the civilization of the white man. However, his efforts were in vain. Around 8 kilometers outside Ushuaia is a small timber-built train station, another popular tourist attraction. From here, a narrow-gauge railway leads to the Tierra del Fuego National Park. Everywhere there are reminders of the former penal colony. Yet it was the prisoners who built this railroad for the transport of stone and trees from the stone pitches. As the train departs, the small engine steams and toots and slowly rolls out of the station. A short journey begins. The small train lazily crosses the plains as the line meanders through the landscape. It's a wonderful journey. Alongside a winding river. And after about 45 minutes, we reach the terminus. Passengers exit the train smiling and contented, and take another glance at the small carriages and the steam engine that are neatly cared for by the railway's engineers. Now we're among pure nature, at the end of the world. The Tierra del Fuego National Park was founded in 1960 and is very accessible. The Rio Pipo snakes through the varied landscape. Over 63,000 hectares cover the border with Chile, surrounded by snow-covered mountains that survey the land. From time to time, the small train comes into view, winding and snorting through the natural landscape, with only one destination, the end of the world. As if in paradise, wild white horses rest amid the fantastic landscape. From the nearby mountains, the Rio Pipo flows in wild cascades onto the plains before calmly flowing out into the bay beyond. A marvelous place, a confusion of small, steep-sided islands, and in the background, snow-covered mountains. Several wooden pathways make it easy to walk to the sea. This is the furthernmost tip of the South American mainland. And from a nearby viewpoint, the end of the world can be surveyed. Here it becomes clear why the first Europeans that came here thought that Tierra del Fuego was the southern section of a continent that extended to the South Pole. The journey along the Beagle Canal is a particularly worthwhile experience. In Port Ushuaia, boats begin an excursion into the fascinating natural landscape. From amid the water rises a mighty rock, the Isla de los Pájaros and los Lobos. Although the boats pass close to the rocky islands, the seals, the sea lions, the cormorants remain totally unfazed. ice-cold water on the border of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans provides sufficient food for the numerous wildlife of this region. Following its discovery, this bleak primeval landscape did not attract interest for centuries, and storms and rain are commonplace here. The boat approaches our main destination, Penguin Island, where this wonderful creature lives safe and secure. Only a handful of people are allowed to go to the island, closely supervised by a guide and sticking to well-defined pathways. Everyone else must observe the penguins from aboard ship. It's fun to watch the Magellan Penguins, which actually bray like donkeys as they waddle along in true penguin-like comical fashion. Tranquil nature and remoteness dominate this unique landscape. This the southernmost tip of planet Earth that is not covered by eternal ice. On the eastern Atlantic coast is Valdez. This sheltered peninsula is home of the sea elephant that arrives here from Antarctica in winter. The Magellan Penguin also comes here each year to breed. Thousands of cormorants create huge colonies as the passing Falkland Strom is rich in fish and a great source of nourishment. Between July and November, the southerly right whale comes close to the Valdez Peninsula to breed and remains during the winter months in this ideal feeding area. This natural paradise is a refuge for several species that are threatened by extinction, and few people are allowed access here. Tens of thousands of seabirds, including cormorants, albatross, oystercatchers, and sea swallows, are well at home here. A peaceful natural haven and conservation area. In the sheltered bay, the whales mate and give birth to their young. The annual cycle of life. After 3 months, when the calves are strong enough, the mighty monarchs of the sea return to the Atlantic Ocean. In the southwest of Patagonia, on the Chilean side of the border with Argentina, is one of the most fascinating and wonderful mountain landscapes on Earth, the Torres del Paine Nature Park. Indeed, the park derived its name from the rock needles of this wonderful mountain range that is situated in the center of a remarkable mountain world. A precarious chain bridge crosses the Rio Grey to one of the most spectacular vantage points of a nearby lake, the Lago Grey. But before we reach the Mirador Lago Grey, the path leads through a kind of enchanted forest that is typical of this region. Crooked trees and strangely shaped trunks create a truly magical atmosphere. It's an awe-inspiring place. Various shrubs and orchids, such as the Codonocus, are to be found here. Suddenly, there's another spectacular sight. The Lago Grey appears with mighty mountains in the background. First, a small rubber dinghy takes us to an excursion boat. The adventurous journey to the glaciers begins. High waves cause the boat to roll up and down. Several passengers are seasick. The boat eventually reaches the impressive Glacier Grey at the southern end of the Patagonian icefield. Here, the ice masses of the glacier meet the waters of the lake. An amazing sight. Rock and ice lay side by side. Although Glacier Grey is not one of the biggest of Patagonia's glaciers, it's nevertheless quite an experience to travel alongside the eternal ice by boat. The glacier is part of the Campo de Hielo Sur, a huge glacial area that extends across both Chile and Argentina. During the last ice age, a thick layer of ice covered the whole of Patagonia. Only the highest summits appeared above the ice. Huge, massive chunks of floating ice break away in impressive fashion. Some kilometers further south of the Lago Grey, on the banks of the Rio Serrano, the landscape is serene. At the time of the sheep estancias, horses were the most important means of transport for the caballeros in this remote part of Chile. Sheep have been banned from the national park, and now totally unspoiled landscapes have returned, as is also the case in the Lago del Toro. Around the lake, the plant life is quite enthralling. The color of the blossom is in stark contrast to the ice of the glaciers. The immense variety of plant life here has now made this nature reserve extremely well known. In the festive gleam of evening, the wonderful works of art of natural creation are beautifully illuminated. The Rio Paine that flows through the northern part of the park is known for its varied walking routes, although for most of the time this region can be quite stormy. The unpredictable weather that can change from sunshine to hailstorm and from hot to cold in just a few minutes can be quite a challenge. Wind, water, ice and rock, each has formed this landscape over millions of years and created scenery that is totally unique. Here in the low regions, there is lush vegetation. Both wind and water are the only sounds to be heard. A world of tranquility and isolation with an impressive mountain backdrop. The surroundings of the Sotogrande are one of the most captivating areas of the entire national park. Striking members of the local plant kingdom are capachitos, slipper flowers that exist in various forms throughout South America. The untouched landscape and special climate favor an abundant variety of rare and endemic plants. Color wherever one looks. The plants here are almost as famous as the mountains. The pathway to the Sotogrande Waterfall travels through a paradise-like flower garden. In spring and early summer, the landscape is full of splendid blossom that is blown by strong winds. The highlight of the Rio Paine is the Sotogrande. The water rages down in several cascades into a lake below. The raw power of the untamed white foaming water that rushes by is real evidence of the natural forces that manifest themselves here in the center of the park. The 30-meter-high waterfalls have now become a popular destination for visitors to the park and trekkers from around the world. Following the Rio Paine, eventually there's a landing stage. From here, there are boat trips on the picturesque Lake Bahoe. The journey across the lake is for many travelers a dramatic adventure. But for the captain of the boat, this kind of weather is normal. Stormy weather is a regular occurrence here. He confidently steers the boat across the lake. On land, close to the Refugio Bahoe, the next passengers are waiting to go on board. They're on the return journey. After the ship has returned to its landing stage, a few kilometers later, the next trip takes us to a magical forest. The variations in form of the old and weather-beaten trees is almost without limit, with fabulous beings spotted in the tree trunks and amazing shapes in the branches of this mysterious forest. Nearby, large steps have been cut into the rock. They were not created by man, but by the force of nature. A unique natural paradise that each year attracts around 80,000 visitors. Since the inauguration of the park, it's become increasingly popular. Wild guanacos live in families that usually comprise up to 15 members. The young are forced to leave the herd when they're between 12 to 15 months old. Guanacos belong to the camel family and are plant eaters. They mainly eat the fresh grass that grows in abundance here. This marvelous wilderness provides the ideal habitat for the local wildlife. Further north of the Lago Bahoe, surrounded by steep rocky slopes, is yet another picturesque lake, Lago Nordenskjöld. At the end of the last ice age and the retreat of the glaciers around 14,000 years ago, wildlife re-established itself in Patagonia. Climatically, Patagonia is the only moderately cool area in the southern hemisphere, and both flora and fauna have adapted themselves to it. From the Lago Nordenskjöld, there's a wonderful view of the park's natural landmark, the 2,500-meter-high Torres del Paine. The remains of a dead guanaco indicate that the park is also the habitat of a legendary and dreaded predator, the puma. Indeed, the shy puma avoids contact with man. but the guanacos have to be on their guard. The surroundings of the Lago Sarmiento have become popular for the observation of wildlife. Here, the natural world of Patagonia is, despite slight encroachment by man, as pure and untouched as it was thousands of years ago. Rock, water, and indigenous plant life combine to create a perfect harmony of nature. A special adventure is traveling on the La Trajita, the Patagonia Express, a journey by steam across the plains. Once a week, the old narrow-gauge train crosses the Patagonian highland. As the landscape slowly passes by, fresh food is cooked for hungry and appreciative passengers. Since 1922, these Baldwin and Henschel engines have pulled these trains. In those days, they transported cattle, wool, wood, and passengers. The old but reliable steam engines are in service between Esquel and El Maitien. North of Torres del Paine, in the Argentine section of Patagonia, is Calafate, capital of the Departamento Lago Argentino, and also one of the most fascinating landscapes in the world. With around 12,000 inhabitants, it's easy to get around this small town that was founded in 1927. The park has helped in the development of the new town. The inhabitants of El Calafate have fully adapted to the requirements of the tourist industry, and the region's new airport has added to its success. Despite its tourist industry, the town has its own unique charm and is extremely popular with international visitors. Folk music and arts and crafts create a positive mood during the hunt for souvenirs. A highly entertaining pursuit. Is gateway to the huge Los Glaciares National Park, a remarkable natural habitat at the heart of Patagonia. Beyond the town are vast, lush meadows that are frequently swept away by the strong winds of this region. Despite the harsh climate, the local vegetation is surprisingly varied, although both wind and rain are evident throughout the year. The people have adapted to the climate, and the wildlife enjoys the remoteness of the untouched landscape of this timeless wilderness. The region's many lakes are relics of the ice that once covered this region. The landscape is one of the world's regions of which little is known. El Calafate, or the capital of the glaciers, is situated on the shores of an impressive lake, Lago Argentino. The decks of the excursion boats provide a wonderful view of the surrounding mountains with their high, snow-covered summits and mighty glaciers. The Lago Argentino, that measures around 1,500 square kilometers, is located amid the Los Glaciares National Park. Several mountain rivers, as well as the ice of various glaciers, flow into the lake. And the floating icebergs are one of the most popular attractions. The huge icebergs of this large Argentinian lake originate from the glaciers in the southern part of Los Glaciares National Park, such as the Uppsala Glacier. Again and again, we encounter huge icebergs that float peacefully in the water until they eventually break up with violent effect. Huge sections of the Uppsala Glacier occasionally fall off into the lake, which often results in meters-high waves that can be extremely dangerous. The Uppsala Glacier is on the northwest tip of the lake. It's the biggest of its kind in South America. Its dimensions are unique, and the glacial tongue of the Uppsala stretches 50 kilometers into the lake. Here, the elements have created wonderful ice formations and even ice caves. Huge chunks occasionally break off and plunge into the lake. In summer, the many excursion boats on Lago Argentino highlight its popularity. The Los Glaciares National Park owns part of Patagonia's inland ice field, a 22,000 square kilometer layer of ice. This continental ice layer extends as far as Chile, on the backbone of the Andes, one of the most fascinating landscapes on Earth. From 47 ice flows, 13 large glaciers are situated on the Argentinian side, and their waters flow into the Atlantic Ocean. Both glaciers and ice flows originate from snow that becomes compressed. They gradually melt and enter the flow. And eventually they flow into the valley on a layer of water where the ice breaks off from the edge of the glacier. In contrast to the Uppsala Glacier, the smaller and more southerly Glacier Spagazzini is not visited by the normal day trip boats. It derived its name from an important scientist, former Italian-Argentinian botanist Carlos Luis Spagazzini. Despite its small size, this glacier also provides a remarkable insight into this world of eternal ice. A fascinating and unusual sight for visitors, mighty and yet very fragile. A fairy tale landscape that is constantly changing. further boats wait to move in closer to the glacial tongue of the Glacier Speccazzini. Finally, the impressive trip on the Lago Argentino comes to an end. Since the construction of a brand new road, the park's most famous glacier is now accessible by land. The Perito Moreno Glacier was created due to the merging of several large ice flows. Its tongue flows slowly into a southerly tributary of the Lago Argentino. The endless ice flow of the Perito Moreno Glacier sometimes reaches as far as the Magallanes Peninsula on the other side of the lake. It was once known as the Bismarck Glacier. Its current name is derived from the Argentinian scientist and geographer Perito Moreno. It's like looking into another world, one that is full of primeval power and mysterious beauty. Glaciers once covered almost a third of the landmass. Now they're to be found on only around 10% of the land. On the hill opposite the glacier, a network of pathways and platforms was built in order to provide the finest views of this unique natural wonder. It is in the warm months of summer that the largest sections of ice break off from the glaciers, a magnificent natural spectacle. Accompanied by loud, thunderous sounds. Visitors to the park witness this natural event that has taken place each summer for thousands of years. In 1903, here it was that Argentina's first national park came into being. Then explorer Francisco Perito Moreno donated 7,500 hectares of land. And in 1981, UNESCO designated this remarkable natural landscape as a World Nature Monument. The long journey from El Calafate in the north to El Chalten is, for most of the journey, uneventful. We seldom encounter other vehicles on the road. Soon, the legendary Fitzroy Mountain comes into view. It was named Volcano by the native people. As we enter the small village of El Chalten, the summit of Fitzroy Mountain is shrouded by cloud. Located close to the Chilean border, the village was founded in 1985. In winter, only around 100 people live here. But in the summer, the village comes to life. Today, El Chalten is a paradise for the adventurous. It's the ideal starting point for tours into the northern part of Los Glaciares National Park. Tourism is also booming in this remote location. Visitors from all over the world are accommodated in the small inns and restaurants of the village before commencing their various journeys into the wilderness, abandoning the comforts of this colorful settlement. The life of the inhabitants of El Chaltén has been adapted to the needs of the region's tourists. From hotel rooms to tents, there's a good range of accommodation here. And the people are proud of their cultural heritage, including their locally produced arts and crafts. From El Chaltén, our journey travels past waterfalls in the Valle de las Vueltas to the Lago Desierto. Horses graze in the valley, and the combination of rock and water that lies in front of the 3,000-meter-high mountain peaks is quite breathtaking. Flamingos, along with the other water birds that live here, don't seem to be at all impressed by the dramatic sight of this extraordinary mountain. The 3,406-meter-high Fitzroy Mountain is one of the most famous natural landmarks of this region. Again and again, waterfalls, a dramatic sight within an unspoiled wilderness. In contrast to the barren world of glaciers, there are also densely wooded areas and moors. Close to forests, the water of creeks and rivers from the higher reaches of the mountains tumbles down into the valleys and creates a white foam as it dashes against the rocks. Patagonia's exotic species of animals and plants are the greatest treasure of this remote landscape that lies between the eternal ice of the glaciers. The clear, melting waters of the glaciers is home to sprouts, while by the trees, the rhythmic and unmistakable knocking sound of the woodpecker is to be heard. Next, we reach the Lago Desierto that is not only famous due to its beautiful location. The 530 square kilometer lake was once an explosive political focal point, as it lies on the border between Chile and Argentina. Fortunately, border conflicts have now been relegated to the history books. Following a short boat trip, we reach the end of the lake where Argentinian border guards are stationed. It's difficult to believe that this was once the scene of the final border struggles of this region. The majestic, snow-covered summit of Fitzroy Mountain can be seen from the Lago del Desierto. Back again in El Chaltén, there's a chance to go on one of the many walking tours of this area and to make for the best vantage points. In addition to the steep incline, it is the strength of the wind that makes progress increasingly difficult, and some of the gusts are particularly powerful. However, both flora and fauna have gradually adapted to the harsh conditions of the region. Rare plants flank the way. Next, we reach our vantage point, and the immense mountain massif of the Fitzroy appears in all its glory. Here, the weather is very changeable. Indeed, in just a few hours, it's possible to experience all 4 seasons of the year. As suddenly as it becomes dark, the sky brightens up once again, and the peaks of the Fitzroy reappear. In addition to the Lago Argentino, the Fitzroy Massif and the mighty glaciers, the Lago Viedma that is situated in the northern section features another scenic highlight of the Los Glaciares National Park. From a distance, we can see the melting green waters of the Lago Viedma. We embark from a small landing stage to the glacier. As with the Lago Argentino, the Lago Viedma is a glacial lake, 80 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide. It's Argentina's second largest lake. The contrast of the modern excursion boat that is equipped with all the latest technology and the untouched wilderness could not be greater. The journey to the glacier provides us with the opportunity to enjoy the thought-inspiring and marvelous views of this fascinating mountain world. One of the most spectacular experiences in this part of the national park is the approach of the boat towards the gigantic ice masses of the Glacier Viedma, the second largest glacier in Los Glaciares. As soon as the boat passes by the huge glacial wall, some of the features of this ice giant become obvious. For thousands of years, the forces of erosion have cut several large caves into the ice. The trip to the Viedma Glacier is not limited to traveling by water. Passengers leave the boat by a convenient jetty. After a short but steep walk on a path that has been cut into the rock, we reach the edge of the mighty glacier. Climbing irons are fitted and the adventure is about to begin. A walk into the ice fields. Among the most beautiful and unforgettable impressions on the eternal ice are the many deep caves that have been formed according to various prevailing conditions. In some places, individual stones are enclosed within the ice. They're a reminder of the enormous might of the glacial ice that forms this landscape. Clearly, it's not only the natural beauty of the glaciers that is highly prized, it is also the fresh water that they supply that is very important to our planet. An almost forgotten icy paradise. In large areas of Patagonia, rainfall is scarce, but the mountain and glacier landscape of this national park guarantees a healthy supply of water. The wonderful combination of ice and rock have created a fantastic landscape that almost looks extraterrestrial. Masses of ice like on no other on this planet. The world of ice imparts a feeling of timelessness for those who experience it. These relics of the Ice Age have dominated the landscape for millions of years. Patagonia, an ancient rock and savanna landscape that has been created out of fire, water, wind, and ice. One of the oldest landscapes on planet Earth, constantly changing, but also frozen in the mists of time itself.